Good morning, church. It's a beautiful day outside, isn't it? It's already warm. Some things to come this afternoon, right? A couple things for you. Obviously, first of all, happy Father's Day to you and yours, whether you're a father or not, whether you, we all have fathers, so happy Father's Day one way or the other. I don't know if you heard, last night when I was doing music, Al Maurer and his wife yesterday celebrated 50 years of marriage, and so if you want to send Al a card, a note or something like that, I'm sure they would appreciate that. I want to thank you for your prayers. Last week I asked you to pray for me. This past week, as I was doing class all week long, it has been a long time since I have sat still and done that much work in settings like that. And so I would get to the end of each day and my brain was very, very mushy. But I want to thank you for your prayers. An amazing class this week, an amazing time. The class actually extends till the end of July, but this was like our intensive time. I was telling Morgan all about it this morning. If you want to hear, I'll tell you about it. Yeah, the professor is just amazing. The people in my class have been in my class. It's this group of people that we continue to have class together, but to see their faces and to be able to interact with them, it made this class on a very different level, and it amplified the learning process. So thank you for that. A very good week. I struggled all week long knowing, and I even asked other people in the class, like, who's preaching this week? Like, do you just not want to preach? Our whole class is the first 5 books of the Old Testament. All of us just wanted to preach Old Testament to you all for months and months and months, but we're not doing that. Not yet, anyway. Very, very good class. Couple quick announcements for you. Council, we are meeting not this Tuesday, but next Tuesday, the 30th at 6:30. Remember that. In the entryway, as you came in, you probably saw there's a bunch of baby bottles out on the table. It is time once again. Normally the baby bottles, we distribute those on Mother's Day, and then we collect them on Father's Day. We would collect them today. Don't panic, you don't have to go fill them up today. Because of the lockdown, they've pushed everything back, and so we're giving those out today, but they're going to be due at the end of July, so that we can get those back in there. And the idea is, as you go through your week, you're just going to put your odd change in there, and then all that money then goes to the Women's Care Center here in Warren. And so if you could grab one of those in your way out, they're spaced out nicely, so you don't have to touch all of them. You can just pick one up and go on your merry way. Final announcement. Allie is heading up for us some graduation baskets. We have 4 graduates, 2 from high school and 2 from college. All of that stuff is due next week, is that right? Next week. So if you want to see her about that, if you want to give her stuff, or if you want to give her a chipmunk just ran in the sanctuary right there. That was awesome. He ran back out, it's all good, but I just saw him out of the corner of my eye. Talk about being distracted. What was I talking about? 4 graduates. You can give stuff directly to her, or you can give her money and she'll take care of that stuff as well. And so due next week, see Allie for all of that. Anything else that I'm forgetting? No. From Psalm 11, in the Lord I take refuge. How then can you say to me, flee like a bird to your mountain? For look, the wicked bend their bows, and they set their arrows against the string to shoot from the shadows at the upright in heart. Then the fountains are being destroyed. What can the righteous do? The Lord is in his holy temple. The Lord is on his heavenly throne. He observes everyone on earth. His eyes examine them. As we come this morning, I want you to know that God sees us and he knows us. He wants to have a relationship with us. From the beginning of time to the end of time, there's this running theme of relationship, and he desires to be with us. He wants to speak to us and hear from us. Know that we serve that kind of God. Let's worship God together.
you need to fill out for your dad. So you can look at it later. I'm talking about, this is the toolbox. This is my toolbox. And most dads have toolboxes. And this is what's in their toolbox to help them. So being a dad is a rewarding job. It takes some work and God's help. To ensure that the proper tools when he needs them. He will need to carry along together all in a toolbox. When he finds himself facing difficult tasks, he can reach into his toolbox and grab exactly what he needs. This is sandpaper. Every dad is a little rough around the edges. At first, he will need some sandpaper to smooth things up as he learns more about his job. This is a ruler. This is my ruler. You know what it is. He needs a ruler so he can take time to do the right thing. Measure twice, then act once. He needs goggles. Safety goggles should be kept close. They protect the eyes so he remembers to watch. When he does, that affect those around him. So he can set a good example. A screwdriver will help him keep things together that start to fall apart. This is a flashlight. And as he is the head of the household, he needs a flashlight so he can be equipped to lead the way. One of those that doesn't work. This is a hammer. He also needs a hammer. Sometimes situations require him to be firm in his stance, so a hammer will come in handy. To secure a tight family bond, he will also need a wrench. This is a level. When life offers him a way that is level and helps him to stay well balanced. This job can take a lot out of him. He should also bring a bottle of water to rehydrate his spirit. And God rehydrates his spirit too. And lastly, being a dad is a messy job. Things don't always go as planned. For this reason, he will need to bring a rag so he can clean up his mistakes. A dad's job may be demanding. He may have to keep with it for years and years and cannot quit. Remember, this position may come with great responsibilities, but it also comes with unspeakable rewards. When he is feeling discouraged, he can sit back and see the amazing creation he has helped to build. So children and everybody, let's pray for our fathers and our Father in heaven. Dear Lord, please keep our fathers safe and know that they have a hard job and they do it to the best of their ability with your help. Amen.
Thanks, Pat. Well, good morning again. We're doing something new. I wish the Tutor kids were here. So this idea, you can see on the screen, I have this small things equal big things. And we're going to spend this week and next week doing this little mini-series, 2 weeks, small things equal big things. I use this exact phrase. You know that I am the marching band director at Warren Area High School. I have been for the past 5 years as the actual director, but I've been on their staff if there's a season this year, this would be my 21st season. But since I've been the director, every year I have this catchphrase that I use with the kids, and it's just kind of like this theme that I keep coming back to. One year it was be better, I think it was. Be bigger. Like think bigger than just you. And so a couple years ago I used this, and they don't know, but I was giving them Jesus, but I just kept saying small things equal big things, and the idea for them was, if you do the small things as we work on our show, it will create a big product at the end. But I was giving them Jesus, they just didn't know it right now. If girls, if you're watching, like you didn't know, but I was giving you Jesus, and now I'm going to give you all Jesus in the context of what I was meaning. So you know that I play ice hockey, and a couple years ago, a friend of mine who plays hockey with me, was on my team, was coaching his son's team, and these were like 10 and 11-year-olds at the time. They're now all well into high school. But he had a goalie, really good kid, but very emotional, and when he didn't get his way, he'd get really down on himself. And he asked if I would just come and work with his goalie, maybe like once a week, once every other week. And so I started showing up to work with the goalie, and as I did that, he and I, we created this bond, and it was really, really good. But the coach that was coaching before our ice time saw that I was working with their goalie. And so he approached me, and he's like, hey, I was wondering, if you could come early next week and work with my two goalies. And I said, sure, I could probably do that. And then the coach that was after our ice time said, hey, I see you're working with the goalies. Would you want to stay late next week and work with our goalie? And by the end of that year, I had worked with every goalie in the Jamestown hockey program. I had just every coach found out that I was working with goalies, and they all asked me at different points to share the ice with them, I'm not great in any way, shape, or form, but I know, I'm not a great player, but I know what good is. Does that make sense? And so, I feel like I'm pretty good at communicating, particularly with teenagers, and so being able to express, okay, you need to adjust this and you need to adjust that, I was pretty good at that. And so, anyway, one of the older goalies, he was about 15 at the time, really big kid, way bigger than me, probably like 6'3", 220 pounds, big dude. Took up a lot of the net. We were running this drill one day, and I always stood behind the net, kind of on top of the net, so I'm almost like looking down on him as the coach would run the drills. And the drill was like this. There were lines of players on either side, and they would hook around to the top of the blue line, and they would come straight down in, and they were just shooting at him, okay? And they started figuring him out. And they did the same thing again and again and again. So as they would come down, they would make a move to their right, my left, the goalie's left, but then they would shoot back across the green to the top corner of the net. And they picked him off again and again and again and again and again. And he couldn't figure it out. He was like, I was watching him, he was getting really frustrated, like, why is this happening again and again? And I held my hand out to the coach, like, hold on just a second. And then I walked, I said, hold on. And I skated him out to like here. We're gonna pretend that our communion table, I know this might be sacrilegious, our communion table is our net, okay? And I stood where he was, and I said, here's what you're doing. And I brought these, I want to show you visually, because I think it's a big deal. So as he came down, he was coming down like this every time. And as they shot, you can see like all of that is now open. I said, you're compensating too far to your left. They're moving this way, and you're jumping way too far. Watch, here's all you need to do. Instead of coming here, here's all you need to do. Ready? Now, this big body, his big shoulders, now that covers the whole top corner of that net. That adjustment of 1.5 inches to 2 inches of him not going this way changed how he played the game. And I said, now come and do that. And the coach started the drill. The players are like, oh, we still have him they started doing the same thing. Everyone, boom, boom, boom. He's knocking them off now. That small adjustment, the small thing, changed his game completely. I don't know if that always translated to like his actual game, but in this drill, he started tearing those guys up. And now they were the ones that were getting frustrated, not him. Small things equal big things. And we're going to take a look at a passage that I know that you know. You could tell the story. Maybe we'll do that one day when we're doing a passage you all know. I'll make one of you come up here and tell it. How about that? And we'll see. We'll do. No, I won't make you do that. Come on. Nobody will show up for church anymore. Like, forget that. That pastor called us out. So we're looking at John chapter 6. And as I always do when we're doing a passage that is familiar to you, I want to encourage you to hear this with fresh ears, okay? Listen to details that maybe you haven't heard before. Put yourself into the story. Maybe be one of the disciples. Maybe be someone who's on the hillside. What is it you're seeing? What is it you're experiencing? What is it you're hearing? Hear this as if it is brand new. John chapter 6, starting with verse 1. Sometime after this, Jesus crossed to the far side of the Sea of Galilee, that is, the Sea of Tiberias, and a great crowd of people followed him because they saw the signs he had performed by healing the sick. Then Jesus went up on the mountainside and sat down with his disciples. The Jewish Passover feast was near. When Jesus looked up and saw a great crowd coming toward him, he said to Philip, "Where shall we buy bread for these people to eat?" He asked this only to test him, for he already had in mind what he was going to do. Philip answered him, "It would take more than a half of a year's wages to buy enough bread for each one to have a bite." Another of the disciples, Andrew, Simon Peter's brother, spoke up, "Here is a boy with 5 small barley loaves and 2 small fish. But how far will they go among so many?" Jesus said, "Have the people sit down." There was plenty of grass in that place, and they sat down. About 5,000 men were there. Jesus then took the loaves and gave thanks and distributed to those who were seated as much as they wanted, and he did the same with the fish. And when they had enough to eat, he said to his disciples, "Gather the pieces that are left over, let nothing be wasted." So they gathered them and filled 12 baskets with the pieces of the 5 barley loaves left over by those who had eaten. After the people saw the sign Jesus performed, they began to say, "Surely this is the prophet who is to come into the world." Jesus, knowing that they intended to come and make him king by force, withdrew again to a mountain by himself. Let's walk through this bit by bit, shall we? So there's a crowd that's following him. We've talked about this before, that it wasn't just Jesus and his disciples, but as he continued to do miraculous things, other people were attracted to that, right? When you see, I don't know if I do, I've told you I love magic. When you see like a street magician or a street performer doing something awesome, crowds gather, right? They want to see the spectacle. Whether they fully buy into the spectacle or not, they want to see it. They're attracted to it. What's going on over there? Even, just downtown yesterday, there was some sort of accident and there was a police car and all these people were like standing on the sidewalk seeing what was going on, right? Even like car wrecks attract a spectacle, right? And so here's Jesus and he's doing all these crazy signs and wonders, and people are attracted to it. And not only are they attracted to it, they're now starting to follow him around. And he crosses the sea and he thinks he's getting away from them, and he sits down with the disciples and he looks up, and here comes the crowd. They're going to follow anyway. Did you notice, I don't know, this jumped out at me to this week as I was reading it. He tells this whole first part. He says that the crowds are following him, and he crosses over and he sits down with the disciples. And then there's this line that seems out of place, and it says, "The Passover feast was near." Isn't that weird? Like they were giving context. It's like context for what time was it. But here's the other part of what it is. The Passover is significant. The Passover is reminding, it's communion. It's what we do, right? It's reminding them of the Exodus. It's reminding them of God providing in the wilderness. And here they are in sort of the middle of nowhere, and God is about to provide yet again, right? There's this parallel that's happening between the Passover and things that they know. Yes, it creates an idea of what time of year it was, but there's this parallel, this symbolism of God providing in the wilderness, and here they are in the middle of nowhere, and I'm about to show up again, and I'm about to provide again. And then I just joked with you about you have to come up here and tell the story. That would put you on the spot, right? That would make you feel uncomfortable if I did that. If I said, Allie, come up here, I want you to tell the story of the feeding of the 5,000. Like, her blood would instantly start, like, even if she knows the story, it's like, okay, I can do that. Your heart starts to thump a little bit harder, right? Like, it's just natural, like, people don't love public speaking. And so, if I just, on the spot, ask you to do something, your heart is going to pump a little bit harder. You're going to think a little bit harder, right? Man, I better make sure I get all the details. What if I forget something, right? Here's Jesus, and he turns, and he says to Philip very specifically, like, all right, how are we going to feed all these people? Talk about being put on the spot, right? Here comes thousands of people, and Jesus wants me to figure out how I'm going to feed them. And yet he already knows the answer, right? Jesus already knows what he's going to do. And Philip replies, very matter-of-factly. We can kind of get some of Philip's character. He's the solver, right? He's going to, like, what are the practical solutions here? And so he instantly thinks, how are we going to buy food for all these people? And he thinks, even if we had 6 months' wages or 200 denarii, depending on your translation, we still won't have enough money. If we worked for half a year, we still won't have enough money to buy enough food for all of these people. But here's the other part of the problem. Even if they had all of that money, they're in the middle of nowhere. Who has enough food for all these people? It's not like there's catering services you can just go over to and be like, hey, I've got a few thousand people over here. I want to know if you could, like, get enough food for the party, right? Even today, like, right? If you're having a big family picnic or you're going to have a wedding and whatever, you schedule them months out so that they can prepare. It's not on a whim that you're going to feed that many people. And so even if they have the money, where are they going to buying enough food for all these people? They couldn't do it. And then Andrew comes forward and he says, here's this boy, and he has 5 barley loaves and 2 fish. Barley loaves are interesting. They're not wheat loaves. They're not the best loaves. Barley is actually considered, and particularly in this time, as kind of like the lesser. It's not very good. And one of the ancient Jewish transcripts, not in the Bible, but the teachers would say barley is only good for the horses, and you wouldn't actually consume it yourself. And so the idea that there are 5 barley loaves, they're not even like the best loaves of bread. Okay, it's not even like good bread. It's just it's what we got right now. And the fish are probably, because it's going to be carried along and they're in the middle of nowhere, they're probably salted fish, and they're probably not. We think of like going fishing, we go to Lake Erie and we pull out it wasn't like a big fish, it was probably a little salted, little snacky thing to go along. It wasn't that these were the best even of the loaves and fish. It was sort of like secondhand. No, we'll do that later. And then Jesus does this thing. He doesn't go like, okay, hurry up, quick, let's pass this stuff out. What's he have them do first? He waits. He says, have everybody sit down. Have everybody sit down. We're going to see some symbolism here and some parallels. You probably, I won't make you do it because I already said that would cause panic in you. You could probably recite the 23rd Psalm, at least some of you. What does part of the 23rd Psalm say? You make me lie down in green pastures. Very specifically in here it says they were on this grassy place. And Jesus says, have everybody sit down. In the 23rd Psalm it says, you prepare a table before me, and here's the loaves and the fish, and he's about to distribute them to his people. And I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. And Jesus is saying, I have what you need. And then he gives thanks. Have you ever, I don't know, I've been backpacking before, and sometimes the food is not good when you're backpacking. It's just like, what is going to sustain you? And if I'm real honest, it's really hard to pray over the food that's just going to sustain you, but it's not going to taste good, and it's not going to be like what I really want, right? Like, what I really want is a steak dinner, but this ramen packet is going to like give me energy to keep going for the next couple hours. It's really hard to pray over that. It's really hard to thank God, like, thank you for this awesome meal, God. And yet Jesus takes the kind of secondhand food and he breaks the loaves and he gives thanks over it before he passes it out. Not thanking God for what he could have, but what he does have. Little things become great things in Jesus' hand. And then he distributes it. But how does he distribute it? If Jesus wanted to, let's hypothesize for a second. If Jesus wanted to, and he has the loaves and the fish right here, he could clap his hands and instantly, we're going to pretend you're the 5,000 and I'm Jesus for a minute. I could clap my hands and instantly in your lap would be a tray of fish and bread, right? If Jesus wanted to do that, he absolutely could do that, am I right? But he doesn't do that, right? What does he do? He gives it to the disciples and he says, I want you to go and do the work. I want you to go distribute. I want you to physically walk amongst the people. It's going to take a while. There's 5,000 men plus women and children. It's going to take a while for you to walk amongst all of them, but I want you to physically go and do the work. Let's fast forward and Jesus, after the resurrection, he's going to ascend into heaven, and what does he say to them? Like, hey, guess what? It's time for you to go and do the work. It's time for you to go amongst the people. Wherever you go, telling people about who I am. He was very intentional. I have what is going to sustain you, and I'm going to give it to these guys, and then they're going to take it wherever they go amongst the people. And then it says that they were filled. They didn't just have a light snack. They were filled. There are a few things on earth that I love more than being full. A big full belly and a good afternoon nap. And here are all these people in the middle of nowhere, and they are filled. There's generosity and fullness. I'm not going to go through it right today. If you want to look something fun up later, go to 2 Kings chapter 4, verses 42 to 44. 2 Kings chapter 4, 42 to 44. It's another story that parallels the story of barley loaves multiplying and feeding a great number from the Old Testament. Parallels. This has happened before. This isn't a singular incident. God amplifying and multiplying. And so then the remains are gathered, and God is generous, but he is not wasteful. And the crowd, as you can imagine, is amazed and in awe of what they just saw. And their response is, this guy is the real deal. We weren't really sure before. We were kind of coming for the show. We heard things, and we knew that he was doing great stuff, but we just saw it. We just all ate it. We experienced it tangibly. We didn't even visually see it with our eyes, but we tasted it. We tasted how amazing he is, and he's the real deal. Let's make that guy the king. Jesus recognized that's going to happen and knows that that's not what his plan was there, and it sure wasn't his time. And so he withdraws. He withdraws by himself. A question that I have, for years and years and years, particularly teenagers, have asked me, how do I know if God is asking me to do something big? What happens if God asks me to do something that's so big and I'm not ready for it? What happens? What happens if he asks me to do something that I'm uncomfortable with? And my answer is usually this. If you are diligent in the small things, when it's time for the big things, you will be prepared for it. My favorite example, Sherry, can you go to the next slide? It's a picture. This is my grandma and grandpa on my dad's side, and this was like 13 years ago now. The year that Marjorie and I got married was 2000, and it just so happened that that year, this set of grandparents were celebrating their 60th wedding anniversary, and my mom's set of parents were celebrating their 50th wedding anniversary. And oddly enough, you don't need to know this, but I'm going to tell you anyway. Both sets eloped when they got married, and so they didn't have a wedding cake. And so at our wedding, we had wedding cakes for each of them, and we had them come and cut a cake, and it was just, I don't know, like to the day I die, it'll just be a special moment with them. But as I was preparing to get married, I asked my grandpa Reiner. I said, Grandpa, you are wise and you've been married to Graham for 60 years. How do I get now where you are? How do I get 60 years from now and be married to Marjorie still? And he said this to me, and it's like the wisest counsel, and I love it. And he said, you wake up and you love her as best as you can today. And then tomorrow when you wake up, you love her the best that you can that day. And all of a sudden, 60 years have gone by. I'm diligent in the small things, and the small things become big things. This picture, at this point, they've been married like 67 years. This is just shortly before they both passed away. They passed away within weeks of each other. My grandma in this picture has Alzheimer's and doesn't really even know who my grandpa is, and yet they're taking naps together and they're holding hands. She doesn't necessarily know who he is, but she knows that this man loves her completely. Being diligent in the small things becomes big things. What are the small things for us? What are the small things that we need to be diligent about? What if God is asking us to do small things right now so that He can build us up to do something broader later? It might require us to think differently about our daily interactions and our daily come-ins and goings, right? If I'm going to be diligent in the small things, then the small things begin today. Who I talk to and how I talk to them and how I prepare changes if I'm going to be diligent in the small things. As a couple years ago, Marjorie and I were on our way to a wedding in Lancaster. Actually, the kids were there too. I don't want to leave you guys out. You were all there. But we were on our way to a wedding in Lancaster, and there's no good way to get between here and there. You have to go all these back roads, you know that. There's no just like highway you get on and you get there. So we're just driving through, and we passed a whole bunch of different churches, but there's one that stood out, and it wasn't because it was big, and it wasn't because it had 5 services, or they had a funny sign or whatever, but they had a sign in the front yard, and I was reminded of it this week because I was reading something else. They had a sign in the front yard, and it was really simple, and it just said, free Spanish lessons, Tuesday night. And that rocked my world, because what that church was doing had nothing to do with Sunday morning. It had nothing to do with who was going to show up on Sunday morning. What it had to do with was they understood what their community was, and they were meeting a need in their community. And that need might not be, the residual effects of that might not be come back to them as a financial thing, or as people in seats, or as like whatever, but they recognize we can impact our community, which will impact our area, which could impact the state, which could impact the world. Do you understand? If we give these Spanish lessons, we can possibly give them other opportunities that they might not have. Do you understand? They saw their community in a different way. Not as a means to get more people to show up, not as a means to make more money, but they saw their community as God sees their community, as people in need, and we're going to meet that need. They took small steps, and really, what were they out? Maybe an hour on a Tuesday night? But what was the greater impact of what they were doing? possibly like life-changing. And church is not about our time here together on Sunday morning. It's not. This is a function of what we do, but this is not what we are about. It's not. For the last couple months, we've sort of seen that. Like, we don't need to be physically present to be church and to be functional. It's beautiful that we're here, and I love to see your faces, even if I only see your eyes. But, like, the function of what we do isn't right here. The function of what we do is when we leave here. Like, this is a springboard for what we're to be about. Our daily interactions with our neighbor, how we talk to them, how we go to the Scandia store, and how we interact with people, how we see our community and the things that we do in our community. So what are the small things that you're going to be about this week? What spiritual practices do you need to begin to undertake so that you're prepared when the big things come? How do you see your community? How will we be able to impact not just the people who show up here, but the people who aren't coming here? What are the small gestures that will make a huge difference in the kingdom of God? Let me pray for us. God, I don't know that I have solid answers to all those questions. And I would be shocked if most of the rest of us did either. But I believe that you are calling us to big things. But to get to the big things, we need to start small. We need to take that first step before we run the marathon. And so, God, I pray that you would point out the small areas of our lives where we can make an impact. In our daily interactions, in our daily times of preparation, in our daily times with you, would you be preparing us for what it is that you have asked us to do? Would we begin to see our community different? Would we begin to see even our time here together different? So that we can make a big impact for your kingdom. We ask this in your precious name. Amen. Okay, I'll just solve it. Man, computers are great when they work. Everything worked perfectly before you all showed up. I promise it did, but that's what we are. So, hear the benediction today. The Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord make his face shine down upon you and be gracious to you. The Lord lift his countenance upon you and give you peace. Amen and amen. Many blessings to you.